Dr. Judith S. Weis is a professor emerita of biological sciences at Rutgers University, Newark. She received her bachelor's degree from Cornell and MS and PhD from NYU. Her research focuses on estuarine ecology and ecotoxicology, and she has published over 200 refereed scientific papers, as well as books on salt marshes, a natural and unnatural history, fish, do fish sleep? Crabs, walking sideways, the remarkable world of crabs, and marine pollution, what everyone needs to know. These were published for the general public and she co-edited a more technical book on biological invasions and animal behavior. She is interested in stresses in estuaries and their effects on organisms, populations, and communities. Much of Judith's research has been in the NY and New Jersey harbor area, but she has also done research in Indonesia and Madagascar. She's on the editorial board for Bioscience, is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and was a Fulbright Senior Specialist in Indonesia. She has been on advisory committees for USIPA, NOAA, and the NAS, and currently chairs the Science Advisory Board of NJDEP, co-chairs the Science and Technical Advisory Committee for the New York, New Jersey Harbor Estuary, and serves on the Waterfront Management Advisory Board of New York City. She chaired the biology section of AAAS, served on the board of CTAC, the Association for Women in Sciences, and the American Institute of Biological Sciences, of which she was the president in 2001. She received the Merit Award from the Society of Wetland Scientists in 2016. Please welcome Judith Weis.
I'm here to talk about plastic pollution and hermit crabs to you today. There's pictures like this all over, and you can see that beaches, even very remote ones, are full of plastic litter. Hermit crabs can be affected in a number of ways by plastic pollution in their environment. There's one rather distressing study that came out from remote islands in the Indian Ocean and in the South Pacific, which are islands that are littered with lots of plastic. And they found that plastic bottles could be death traps to hermit crabs. The land hermit crabs can climb in, and depending on the angle that the bottle is lying on, they can often get trapped and not get out because the inside of the bottle can be slippery, and if they have to climb up at all to get out, they can slide back and not get out. And if they can't get out, they're stuck inside the bottle, and within about a week or so, they'll die. And then it's not just that individual crab, but when the crab dies, it releases an odor, and hermit crabs are attracted to dead hermit crabs because that means there might be a good shell available if there's a dead crab. So others will come to investigate and see, what kind of a shell is there. And if it's a good shell, they'll come in and pull out the dead crab, but then they're trapped too. So we have a sort of a multiplying effect where dead crabs accumulate inside these plastic bottles that are littering the beach. And the particular study found each bottle had about 9 dead crabs. So one container seemed to have over 500 dead crabs in it. And they estimated, I guess they took an average of how many bottles there were on the beach. I don't know how they got the number, but they estimated that over 500,000 have been killed after being trapped in bottles and other kind of plastic debris. Now, of course, we're all sad because we love hermit crabs, but it's more than just losing hermit crabs. The hermit crabs do ecosystem services for the environment. They shred leaf litter and other organic materials that can get then recycled in the environment. They also pick up seeds and move them around. They dig burrows in the sand during the day to be cooler on very hot in the heat. And this turns over the sand and soil, which keeps it soft rather than getting kind of crusted on top, which would be very difficult for seeds for plants to grow on. So the hermit crabs are doing important things, and deaths of large numbers is not only is bad for the environment. So that's one story about land hermit crabs, beach hermit crabs. But there's also problems with the marine hermit crabs that are living in the water, which is tires on the seafloor. You can see on the left and on the right picture of the inside of a tire that has attracted hermit crabs. It attracts other life too, but the hermit crabs, and we have lots of tires in the water. I mean, they end up in the, that are discarded. Some are recycled and so forth, but there's a certain amount that end up in the oceans where they're harming a bunch of organisms. The crabs could climb in pretty easily, but they can't climb out very well because of the inside of the tire being curved. They find it impossible to get out. So they get stuck inside these tires, and most will probably starve to death sooner or later. And in 1 year, people who were studying this counted over 1,200 hermit crabs that became stuck inside 6 tires that they put in on the seafloor for this experiment. They also did an experiment in the lab where they put a large tire inside a large aquarium and then put groups of crabs, 10 crabs, either inside or outside the tire. And the ones that had been placed outside the tire, out of 120 individuals, about 19 placed outside managed to climb inside in 18 hours, whereas none of the ones placed inside were able to get out. So what you see in the field is reflected in this laboratory experiment. Crabs are hermit crabs, as well as most, well, I don't know most, but lots of marine animals are attracted to plastic because it emits odors. There's particular chemicals that they release that leach out that attract various marine life. And because it smells like food to them, probably. And there's a particular study that came from the University of Hull in England, where they tested a particular chemical called oleamide. And they were testing, these are of course aquatic marine hermit crabs. And they tested if the hermit crabs in their area, Yorkshire, England, were attracted to oleamide as a particular chemical, and that leaches out of plastic into the water. And when they were exposed to low concentrations, they had the same reaction as they would have to food. Their hearts would beat faster and their respiration rates increased. And an article, the reporter interviewing the researcher said, we found that they're excited. They almost get hyperactive. Well, that word excited turned into a huge disinformation on the part of huge numbers of news companies. And we have headlines. Plastic is turning on hermit crabs. It's making them turned on, making them horny. They're sexually attracted. All over, I was seeing this all over, and the investigators were totally embarrassed by this whole thing, and they said, they got interviewed again and said, we mean it's attractive like food, not sexually attractive. And this is like a huge amount of misinformation. One news outlet prints it and it gets taken over and reported by dozens and dozens of others. And it was really kind of a big mess in terms of misinformation that spread all over, and the correction did not spread anywhere near as much as the initial exciting headline about hermit crabs getting turned on sexually. It was totally all wrong. All right, other kinds of plastics, tiny pieces of plastic, which are called microplastics, shown here, give you an idea of the size. They're up to 5 millimeters in size. They're called microplastics. They come from a variety of sources. Some come from breaking up bigger pieces, like a plastic bottle, breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces. They also are fibers coming out from our clothing. They're also tire wear. Your tire tread wears out. What happens to that? It doesn't vanish, It becomes microplastics in contributing to road dust. And then there's microbeads, these spheres that were common in personal care products like facial scrubs, but they were outlawed, they were banned by most countries. So they're now pretty scarce in the environment. These tiny pieces of plastic are eaten by a whole lot of animals. Again, animals are attracted to the odor, or perhaps some of them might look like their food, but mostly it's the smell, and they get into food webs. Another issue about these microplastics is that toxic chemicals from the environment, like PCBs and other and toxic metals and so forth, attach to the outside, so that when animals eat them, they are getting toxic chemicals as well as the chemicals of the plastic itself. These microbeads, as I said, the spheres, are phased out in most countries. So looking at microplastics, they come in a variety of shapes and colors and sizes. This picture on the right, you can see different shapes, you can see different sizes, the different age, different colors, different density. Some float, they're lighter than water and seawater, and then others sink. So they're made out of different chemical types like polystyrene, polyethylene, and so forth. So they differ in many ways. They also have, in addition to that the basic thing they're made of, there are added chemicals such as BPA, which you've probably heard of, and phthalates, which are very worrisome chemicals that are added in some cases to make the plastic softer or something. These are endocrine disruptors, for example. And then you also have the environmental chemicals that may attach to the outside. So that microplastics that have been, quote, weathered, meaning they've been sitting in the environment for a while, have probably gotten more of these environmental chemicals attached to them than new so-called virgin microplastics. As I said, some of them are coming from the breaking up of larger pieces of plastic. Styrofoam is one kind that breaks very easily, as I'm sure you're aware. It breaks into tiny pieces. Plastic bags also break up into smaller and smaller pieces. And one bag could break up into over 1 million microplastics. And you have toxic chemicals leaching out from the plastic and attached to the outside. Other harder plastic materials like bottles eventually break up into microplastics too. So microplastics come in many shapes. You can see here, a variety of different shapes. These are fragments of bigger pieces, We've got the spheres we mentioned before, and these are microfibers, which turn out to be the most abundant type in the environment. When you collect a sample with nets, you don't find that many of them because the long, thin fibers can go through the holes of the net. So if you collect it properly, whole water samples, you see that microfibers are in fact the most abundant type of microplastic in the water and in the air. Where do they come from? Well, they come largely, the most, this ratios of the different kinds this is from one place, this graph. So this will vary from one place to another, but just about every place, the biggest chunk are these microfibers from clothing and textiles. And then the next biggest chunk is tires. So this tires end up as dust on the road, and then when it rains, wash off into the water. So the city dust is probably a good chunk of this may be tire particles. And then you've got all these other things in a relatively small amount. And the beauty products, that's the microspheres or microbeads, are a very small percentage here. So we've got clothing as the major source of the major type of microplastics. And when you wash your clothes, you have thousands and thousands can come off one item of clothes in one washing. And then once you've washed and you put it in a dryer, the dryer is releasing comparable amounts from an item of clothing. They are not trapped in the kinds of filters that washing machines and dryers currently have. So they are going through and out through the wastewater into sewage treatment plants. The sewage treatment plants do a pretty good job. They will keep about 90%, 95% of them out. But what's left over is still, billions are still reaching waterways. If you're starting out with such a huge number, if only 10 or 5% of them get into the water, it's still a very large number. And when you say that the plants filter out most of the microplastics, they go somewhere. They go into the sludge part of the sewage, and the sludge now is loaded with the microplastics. And what do they do with the sludge? It depends on where you live. But there are many places where the sludge gets applied to agricultural fields as a fertilizer. So these microplastics are then ending up in the soil and potentially getting into crops. So you're saving the water from a lot of them, and then that's getting put in soil instead. So the ones we're concerned with are ending up in rivers, lakes, and oceans, and we talked about chemicals getting attached to them and getting eaten by animals and so forth. Here's the microfibers. Something you might want to remember is that top loading machines release a lot more than front loader. So when you're in the market for a new washing machine, keep this in mind. Hot water releases more than cool water. A gentle cycle, for some reason I can't explain, releases more. Old clothes release more than new clothes. And then dryers are releasing equivalent amounts into the air. So here's just some numbers depending on different kinds of fabrics. You see polyester is releasing almost 500, whatever. And I think they have an extra zero here. And acrylic is releasing 700,000. That's, one garment per, and then fiber conditioner increases the release. So it's huge numbers. In textiles, they don't just release these microfibers when they're being washed or dried. They're releasing them when the textile is being manufactured. They're releasing them when the item of clothing is being disposed of. So throughout the whole life cycle, of a item of clothing, it is constantly releasing microfibers. It's releasing them when you're walking around. When you're wearing clothes and walking around, you're dropping microfibers into the air. So we have potential human health and perhaps potential toxicity to aquatic life and terrestrial life and the ecosystem. Some studies done on effects on crabs. We've got mole crab here. That doesn't look much like a hermit crab, but it's in the same group of crabs. And the Anamura, which is the same group of crabs with hermit crabs. There was an excellent study where they exposed mole crabs to appropriate environmental levels of microfibers that they made from polypropylene rope. And they looked at gravid females and looked at the reproductive success and their mortality and development of embryos between the microfiber exposed and controlled crabs. The exposed crabs had higher mortality, more of them died. They didn't keep their eggs as well, and the embryonic development was impaired. So this is a realistic study using fibers, using environmental levels, and this was long-term exposure going through 3 reproductive cycles. So this is an excellent study. They're not all that good. In hermit crabs, there have been studies looking at behavior effects. They had the crabs put in what they call the suboptimal shell. Let's say the shell has got a crack in it, or it's too small. It's not a great shell. And they put the crabs in a tank with a new, better shell that they could move into. And half of these crabs had been exposed to microplastics while the other hadn't. And again, in this study, this was a good one because they used levels that were comparable to the environment. And the exposed crabs did not interact with this better shell as often as the control crabs. They didn't touch them as much. They took longer to get to it. They spent less time checking it out, and they were less likely to enter it and less likely to actually move into this better shell than the unexposed crab. So this is potentially important. This is important behaviors for hermits to be able to assess a potentially better shell and move into it. And so this is disrupting this behavior of gathering information and processing it. Another kind of behavior that has been found to be changed by microplastics in general, was when they fight over a shell. The typical thing is, there's a crab has a shell and another crab thinks the shell is better, and they fight. And the usual fight, the attacker wraps on the shell and its attack, and tries to evict the crab inside the shell. So plastic exposed crabs that were trying to get into somebody else's shell had weaker attacking behavior. So they weren't as aggressive as at trying to get the shell. And those that were defending the shell weren't quite assessing their attacker as well. So they tended to give up their shell sooner to a crab that they might have won, that was, not necessarily gonna win this fight, but they're giving up more easily. So again, this behavior of important kinds of behaviors for hermit crabs was impaired. So we see this damage to hermit crab behavior. On the other hand, if you're a hermit crab and in a place where there's not very many shells around, sometimes a piece of plastic can be your home. Better than having nothing to put your abdomen in. Probably a bottle top is a lot better than nothing. In terms of plastics, what can you do? There's a number of things you can do. Avoid straws. Don't buy water in bottles. Take a refillable water bottle when you go out. Ask takeout places to hold the plastic utensils. Buy your shampoo as a bar rather than in a bottle. The same thing with laundry detergent. These are all available. And when you're washing your clothes or buying clothes, try to get natural fabrics rather than synthetics. Wash them in cold water, use less detergent, avoid the delicate setting. Use front-loading washing machines. If you own one in your basement, you'll have to wait till you get a new one. Dry on a clothesline rather than a dryer if you can. Don't do the laundry less often. Wait till you have full loads. And there are filters available for about $150 to install on your washing machine. It's one called Lint Lover, LUV-R, that will trap the microfibers. And there are other things, one called a guppy bag, and there's a Cora ball that you can put in the machine that will get some of the fibers, but the filter is really the best. So that's, I think, the end. Yes, thank you for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your meeting.